All right, I think we can go ahead and get this party started already. I don't see anyone in the chat quite yet, but that's okay. I'm sure some folks will roll around sometime soon. And if not, then I guess it's just you and me for today, Tom. But we are back. We're back after taking a week off. Thanks so much, everyone, for your patience in letting us take a week off in between our discussion of this Owl House special. I do really appreciate everyone kind of understanding. We don't necessarily we do this for fun, right? Like, this isn't necessarily something that we want to stress ourselves over. Also, between you guys and me, I had not one but two job interviews last week. So I needed the time to prepare for those and do my adult responsibilities. So I really appreciate all of you understanding and being patient as we took a week off. Also, hello folks in the chat. Hello Ed, hello Magical, thanks so much for being here. As always, really appreciate y'all being here. And as always, I am, of course, joined by my lovely co-host, my lovely buddy from across the sea, Tom from Curmudgeon Media. Tom, want to say hi to the people?
I'm from beyond the sea, not across the sea.
Beyond the sea. That's right. I'm
I'm from
sorry.
beyond the sea, because then that way you can sing a little jingle about it.
There we go. That's right.
Mark's Mediocre Productions want to know if they missed anything. You missed so much.
You missed everything.
You just missed the most beautiful two-part harmony ever sung. And it's too late. We're not doing it again,
Yeah,
ever.
yeah. And
I'm
also the
really
VOD
sorry.
glitched out and you can't go back and watch it. Sorry.
The VOD glitched out. You can't go back and watch it.
No,
And that's just, that's just on you. I'm sorry.
you didn't miss anything, Mark. We just got started. Also, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. So before we get started today, so we are going to be jumping back into our discussion of the second Owl House special. Just a preface to everyone before we jump right in. I did not rewatch the special, and it has been like 2 weeks since we last discussed it. So I apologize in advance if I don't quite remember everything, if I'm a little all over the place, because I am also trying to remember what I wanted to say about this stuff like 2 weeks ago. So just bear with me. Bear with me if I am not quite as articulate as I usually am, because I am also trying to like formulate my thoughts as I am trying to say them at the same time. So thank you all for your patience all around. Really, really appreciate it. Okay, but let's go ahead and just get started. Let's get back right into it. Also, hello, May. Welcome, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. So I think where we left off, again, apologies if we're not quite exactly at the right place where we left off last time, but I think where we left off last time was the scene where Rain is, possessed by Bellows, and they are trying to possess the collector, right? But the collector like wakes up and is like, what the heck, why are you alive? And then Bellows is like, you take such good care of us, you're so kind, and your kindness brought me to life, right? Which of course is like the manipulation.
Complete bullshit.
Complete bullshit, right? Exactly.
I imagine when the collector waking up, I picture it as the Lemmy meme, Lemmy waking up.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that Lemmy meme when he's like,
Ugh.
he's like, his eyes are super squinted, and yeah, that means so funny. Yeah, that's exactly what the collector was like when Bellows was right over him, just like, what
the
fuck? What the fuck? Yeah, exactly.
Petition to recast the collector as Lemmy.
Oh my gosh, that would be so funny.
No
Someone
one would
should draw that.
understand
Someone
that.
should draw the collector waking up as the Lemmy meme.
I should do that.
You should. That would be amazing.
It's in my power to do that.
So yeah, the collector unfortunately falls for the manipulation, right? And we talked a little bit last time, right, about how the collector is just a child, right, and is easily kind of falling for these things, which is sad, because we know that the collector now is like this lonely child, right? So of course they're gonna get easily manipulated.
They're just a scrimblow.
Just a little scrungly.
They're just a scrunkly scrimblow. There's nothing. They're
If there's anything you take away from our streams, guys, if there's anything that you take away learning about the Owl House from our discussions, there's two really important things, two key things that I hope are the only two things you walk away from, if nothing else. One is that the collector is a scrunkly little scrimblow, and we love him. And two, Bump's got the rump. The two most important things about the Owl House.
I mean, I feel like the only reason they don't show us Bump's rump is because it would make us all feel inadequate by comparison.
Exactly. They are sparing us our feelings.
We already feel inadequate looking at his hair.
Exactly. Oh my god, too true. All right, so we talked a lot last time, right, about like the Kikimora thing and about how kind of disappointed we were with this whole thing. So we won't get too much into that this time around because I feel like you guys have heard us complain about it too much already. But just to kind of summarize what we said last time, right? Like the thing with Kikimora that was the most kind of disappointing to me is that like she started off as this kind of like intriguing character with like this like kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of like her kind of falling down her own path of insanity and corruption, which was going to be like really fun and interesting to watch. But then she ended up being kind of a joke character, and like the episode where she was like talking about visiting her family and like that whole thing was just kind of like played as a joke. I was like, oh, so this character is like not someone we're supposed to be taking seriously whatsoever, right? And so this whole thing at the end is just sort of like, it just felt a little bit like a waste of time.
It's the kind of stuff that would be fine in a Mooring Mark comic.
Right, exactly. Totally fine in a Mooring Mark comic, or maybe if this was a proper season 3, right? And we got like some like episodic episodes thrown in there somewhere in there, then maybe we could have had a little B plot with Kikimora. But because it's like we have 3 specials left, we only have so much time, and like we have so much in this episode like surrounded around Kikimora. It's just like, ugh. We could have been using this time for like Ida or someone, right?
Literally anyone else.
Literally anyone else.
We've been deprived. We've been starved of Ida.
Really have been starved of Ida. And like I did see some people, you know, this moment where Luce is like, she's just doing the same thing that Bellows did, the scare people into worship thing. Like people did talk about like, oh, Kikimora's use is as a villain in this episode is to kind of highlight the influence that Bellows still has within the Boiling Isles. Like, oh, his brainwashing and his manipulation were so deeply ingrained in the people of the Boiling Isles. Like, that's why Kikimora is still doing this. And like, I get that interpretation, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I feel like it's just not necessary because we already still have Bellows here. We already still have like,
we have actual Bellows.
We have actual Bellows, and we even have characters like Terra, right? Like Terra Snapdragon, who
I mean, we don't anymore.
well, we don't anymore, but we had her like in the beginning, right, to kind of showcase like, oh, there's still kind of people there who are trying to manipulate their way into getting what they want, right? And Odalia is there too, right? Like she's still there, like facing her punishment as Mama Dahlia, right? And so like it felt a little unnecessary to have Kikimora here, and also like so disconnected from the collector and what's going on with the main plot and everything. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to complain too much about it, but yeah, those are just my biggest gripes with the whole thing.
This is just sound really weird, but I would have been happier with Kikimora being like a turncoat.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need a lot really for that. Like you could have Kikimora just like be part of the general kid group that give them the tour around the school. I think if the villain were just Boscha, and because we've established, I mean, you've established what kind of why Bosch is here in terms of how she reflects upon certain characters, particularly Amity and Willow. Kikimora kind of is just there for there to be a big fight, which we didn't necessarily need at all.
You brought up Boscha, and I do want to go back to Boscha a little bit. So I know that I talked last time, right, about Boscha's kind of use as an antagonist in this episode and how that kind of does showcase the progression of both Amity and Willow as characters and their development. And I really did like a lot of what Basha had to offer in this episode. And this is a moment again that I did really like, right? Where, you know, Amity, you know, Kikimura comes in and is like ready to literally murder a bunch of children. And, you know, they're trapped in this pit or whatever. And Amity is like, Basha, are you really gonna let this happen? Like, this is a bit much even for you, right? And Basha like has this look, right, where she like for a moment does kind of like regret it, but then she just kind of walks away, right? Like she just sort of lets it happen. And I like this moment a lot. I like the Basha stuff in this episode a lot because we already established, right, that Basha is going through this sort of like internal struggle of like she lost her teammates, she lost her friends, but she feels like she can't show weakness because like that's what she believes a leader needs to be, right? Which is of course in contrast to what Willow is also dealing with, or almost like a parallel of what Willow is dealing with, right? But of course, Basha ends up going in the opposite direction of what Willow ends up dealing with in this episode. So I really like the way that that parallel is kind of set up, right? And so to get this kind of like moment of Basha having this like inner conflict, but then of course she ultimately does decide to just walk away from it. Like I really like that. I really liked until the very end. I like all the Basha stuff a lot.
Which is the until the very end?
Yeah, until the very end.
Is it the bit where she kind of does a 180 and becomes pathetic?
I don't mind her becoming pathetic, but she ended up fighting alongside Bartholomew at the end, and that's what I didn't necessarily.
And it just
like.
kind of happened.
Yeah, it didn't feel earned. It didn't feel earned.
Yeah.
If that moment was saved for the next special, for the third special, then maybe like I could have believed, oh, maybe something happened like off screen in the in between time, like between Basha and Bartholomew or whatever. But because it happened like immediately and at the end of this episode, it just didn't feel earned. It just felt like it came out of nowhere. I didn't quite believe that Basha would turn around that quickly. So yeah, I just didn't like that.
I guess my attitude towards all of this is that I still question how necessary some of these characters are for us to see again compared to, you know, relative to how much time we have before the story's over.
Sure. Yeah.
I keep thinking about like Castlevania, you know, and Castlevania has a very, very large cast of characters. And like I just keep thinking, like, how weird and unsatisfying would it be if Castlevania felt the need to, like, touch base with every fucking tiny character before the story ended? Like, there are so many, like, vampires in Dracula's court who don't die in season 1, who you just never see again because they're not important. Like, they're really not that important. They occupy a similar position in the story to someone like Boscha. And I agree that Boscha operates in a very specific way in this episode as a reflection upon Amity and Willow. But that's only because that's the way they chose to write it.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas I personally have always felt that actually Willow and Amity function as actually really nice mirrors of each other.
That is also true, yeah.
Because their own development and their relationship to one another is far more symbolic of how far they've come and what their vices are than Boscha will ever be, in my opinion.
That is a really good point. I didn't really think about that, but
and so even though it is true that in the context of how they chose to write the story, Boscha is important to the overall kind of message of it, I still don't fundamentally believe the way they chose to write the story is the most satisfying thing. I just don't care about Boscha. Like I keep, you know, when you get to season 3 of Castlevania, it chooses to focus upon 2 characters from Dracula's original court from season 1 who have their own arc throughout season 2 and 3. You've got your main trio, but there's loads of characters that just aren't that important that you just never see again and you never really think about it. You're not sat there, you know, like, oh damn, I really wish we saw this rando that was like a bit villain in one episode, or that one priest from episode 1 or something. Like it's Boscha was never that important. She was just a bully. She was just like
that's a good point. And I do like that, like I guess I'll say that, like, if you were going to include Boscha as a character, like, you know, in the show in general, right? Like from season 1 to season 3. If you're going to include Basha as a character, like I do like that they gave her a little bit of humanizing moments in this episode, right? Like I feel like they maybe should have given that to her in season 2 to kind of make her a little bit less of like a flat character, to make me care about her a little bit more, like earlier. But you do bring up a really good point that like if she was just taken out of the narrative entirely, like we have really lost that much? Maybe not. Like I don't think so, right? So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I'm just mourning the lack of Ida.
Yeah, that's very, very true. But
It's
I do agree
it's
with May that like while it's not necessary to check in with all these characters, it is fun, right? And that is kind of a big aspect
it's
of the show too. Like it does have to be fun.
I again it's not like I don't agree, but we've officially reached like crunch time
I
now
know,
in
I know.
terms of
We're supposed to be in end game mode, like right? Yeah. So I
we're in crunch time now, we're in endgame
yeah,
mode.
I see all the different perspectives. There are some that I agree with more than others. There are some where it's like, okay, I can see why that choice was made, right? But yeah, again, this special overall, I did really like it, but there were definitely things about it that I think could have been better. Also, hello, Robin. Welcome, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. All right, so this next part, right? Camila, so Camila was hands down my favorite part about this special, right? Like every single thing Camila did, I was like, yes, you are perfect, and I love you. So this part I really, really loved. I loved how she tried to use the ice glyph herself, right? She like grabbed this bone off the ground and was drawing the ice glyph, and she's like, I think I remember how to do it. And Luce is like, no, mom, wait, like don't do it, right? Because she knows that it does have to be kind of like perfect, right? Otherwise, it's gonna mess up. And so Camila does the ice glyph, and I don't actually know what she does wrong here. I don't know the glyphs well enough to be able to point out what her mistake was with drawing this glyph, but she does draw it incorrectly, right? She doesn't quite get it right. And I really like that we get a moment of Camila just like messing up with the glyphs, right? Because like we haven't seen too much going wrong with the glyphs, right? Like we saw when Luce was trying to teach Lilith and Ida the glyphs, they were kind of struggling with it a little bit. So we had that episode. But other than that episode, we never really got too much with the glyphs that kind of did showcase like this is actually something that's really hard to learn, right? And I feel like that's really important to kind of highlight, especially as we get into this, particularly important moment with Luz later on in the special, right? To kind of showcase how much she has in terms of like skill and talent to offer. So I just really like this moment that just highlights how tricky the glyphs can be, right? Like how difficult they actually are, because it just goes to show how good Luce really is at wild magic, right? Like this is just something she's really good at. She's obviously worked really hard at it, and I just really like that we have this moment to kind of showcase that.
It also it also in many ways kind of draws a parallel between Camila and Ida, because
Yeah,
you'll
true.
remember when Ida was first introduced to practicing wild magic through glyphs, she kind of did something almost exactly like this
Right, totally.
with the ice glyph, except she did it on purpose, and it fucked up.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that parallel. That's right. Lou's just they're two moms. Her two moms are the same.
Mm.
Also, hey Tune, thanks so much for being here. Welcome, welcome. Your take on this is that felt jarring to give Basha this much presence at the end. Yeah, middle act symptom for sure, for sure. Um, getting out of the way some of the boxes they needed to check. Yeah, I can definitely see what you're saying there.
Yeah, I think Toon and I agree on a lot of things, as far as all of this is concerned, because I just feel like it's a surprisingly uneconomical way of choosing to tell this story, I
Yeah,
guess.
sure.
When they're so tightly running out of time. Like what salvages, I think, the Steven Universe finale, it's not flawless, but what salvages it is just how economically they're able to cover the sheer amount of ground they needed to cover.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. No,
Like,
totally. Absolutely.
they were also put under a very strict kind of condition in terms of what they had the time to do, and Rebecca Sugar was thankfully able to like barter for 6 more episodes, which is not a lot. Like, I mean, if you added up the minutes, it would probably even out between those last 6 episodes and these 3 specials. You know, maybe Steven Universe had a little more, but it would even out roughly.
Right.
Uh, and there are points where it's like, okay, they just kind of threw that in there because they needed to cover that ground. But they always know where, okay, this is where we need to put emphasis. This is what we need to spend time on, you know.
Right.
You
Totally.
can
Totally.
you can look at the scene where they're falling and Steven like fuses with them to bring them back out of their gems, and it's like, okay, this is a very, very rushed way of establishing the new designs. But like, the new establishing the new designs is not that important relative to other things that they spend more time on because they know how to economically divvy up
Yeah.
the screen time, which is why this bothers me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. Totally. I totally
not
hear what you're saying.
it's not the time to be doing goofy fun things. We simply don't have time for it.
Yeah, and like
Clearly.
I do think that we have time for goofy. I think we have time for fun,
It's not this much.
but not this much and not in this way. Like not with Kikimora. Like I don't know. I will say though, I will say, as much as I've complained about Kikimora, as much as I've complained about her role in this special, as much as we've complained about how much screen time that she's got in the special, this line did make me laugh when Camila was like, Kiki Miki. This did get a good chuckle out of me, and I enjoyed this. I was like, yes, she's pathetic. Say her name wrong. No one cares about her.
Rest in spaghetti.
Rest in
Miki.
spaghetti. I mean, we want to talk girl failures. We want to talk. You want to talk girl bosses to girl failures. Kiki Miki is definitely up there. Oh man. So yeah, Kiki Miki got a good laugh out of me, but overall I did not really think that she needed to be here.
I like her voice though. I like the voice actor.
Yeah, the voice actor is great. Definitely.
It's interesting to the crew thinking Kikimora would click more with the fan base than it did. It's that's like the risk, isn't it? That's the risk.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
What interests you as a writer will not necessarily communicate. It won't necessarily communicate to the audience, and then where does that leave you as a writer?
Right.
You know, how do you gauge what the priorities are? You know, that's a thing that Buffy was constantly. Oh my god, I'm the one who made it about Buffy.
Oh my god, the first time that Buffy is brought up in a stream, and it wasn't because of me.
That's something Buffy was constantly struggling with, and which the writers had to work around.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Caused a lot of tension. It's like, sorry guys, you can't kill off Spike. He's a fan favorite.
Exactly.
You know? This character, the people aren't responding so well to them. You've got to sideline them, or you've got to do this. You've got to course correct, and that's a difficult thing to do as a writer. Definitely. And it's something that they already had to do a lot of because they got fucking cancelled.
Yeah.
But it's I mean. I honestly agree. Like, based on what we see, it seems like they kind of wanted us to click more with Kiki Miki. But yeah, I don't even dislike her. Like, I feel like I harbor less animosity towards Kiki Miki. I'm never calling her Kiki more.
Yeah, no one ever should.
Like I harbor less animosity towards Kiki Miki than I think you do.
Sure, I think that's fair.
But I didn't really like. I was so indifferent to seeing her in this episode when Ida was right there, and I just want to hang out with Ida. For a bit.
Yeah. But again, this moment with Camila was good. You know, Kiki Miki, Bruja Toss. Bruja Toss is objectively hilarious. Like, that's so funny to me. Oh my god.
Now you need to bring up either Fargo or Cowboy.
Yes, I need to bring up like Fargo or Blade Runner or something.
To make it go full circle. That's a challenge before the end of this stream.
Exactly. I'll think about it. I'll figure out a way to tie it in. But yeah, I think we could have gotten some Kikimora in this episode. You know, we could have still gotten Bruja Toss in there somehow. I feel like that was really funny and that was great. And I love Camila. But yeah, I do agree that it's one of those things, right? Like, it's like if the crew was a big fan of Kikimora and the writers were a big fan of her, Like, I can understand why they would want to include her, but yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, you know, especially when we're this close to the end, like you got to kill your darling sometimes, right? Like
Yeah,
that's just what you got to do.
it's Hidetaka Miyazaki, the guy who makes the Dark Souls games, the you know, Dark Souls, Elden
Mhm,
Ring,
mhm.
all that. The least favorite part of all of those games for everyone is the swamp bit. There's always a bit in every one of those games that has a swamp, and everyone hates it. But like when he's been asked about it, he's always like, you know, every time I make a game, I really try to not add a swamp because I know people hate them, but I just love swamps. I just really want to add swamps. It's in my heart. I have to do it, and I just can't fault him. I can't fault the guy. Like
Yeah.
you live your dreams,
Live your
sir.
swampy truth.
Live your swampy truth, and maybe Kikimori's Kikimiki, sorry, is their truth. Live
Yeah.
their Kikimiki truth.
The Kikimiki truth. There we go.
Yes, Shadow, he does refuse to give up the swamp. And who
Yeah.
are we to complain after he's won Game of the Year, like time and time again? Maybe he's like critically acclaimed. Maybe he knows more about making games than we
Just
do.
accept the swamp. Just accept
Just
it.
accept the swamp. Accept Kikimiki.
Exactly.
She's here now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly what Toon said. Like, never necessarily hated her, just that she's eating up time in this special. I will say that I did start to greatly dislike her as a character ever since I think it was the Hunting Palisman episode, I don't remember, the one where she went off to go see her family. Ever since that episode, I just really did not like her because, you know, I talked about this in the last episode, so I won't stay on this point for too long, right? But Kikimora was just the one character in this entire show that went in the opposite direction, right? Like every other character, like who started off as a gag character, went on to like get more depth, get more interest, get more like dimension, right, and development and everything. Like fucking Hootie or Steve or King, right? Like all these characters like got so much depth and complexity to them, and Kikimora was the one character that went in the opposite direction.
It actually doesn't take that much, in my opinion, to give a character surprising depth.
Yeah, yeah, like with Hootie.
Like, you know, in Cowboy Bebop, in episode 25, Faye is at the airport, and there's this old lady sat there talking to herself. And she's like talking about how lonely she is, and she's waiting for someone, but she's worried that they're not going to show up because they're late, and she thinks that she's been left on her own. And then a man shows up, and it's the guy from the Big Shot TV show. And he gets this, like, he is that character, and his co-host are like 100% a joke. Like the biggest jokes of the entire show.
Yeah.
And even he gets this like one moment of just honest character development with his mom, and it's like 30 seconds of him talking to his mom, and it's like, oh
yeah
you're a real person with feelings.
exactly. So I feel like it's too late now with Kikimiki. Like if they try to do it at this point, like it's just not gonna feel earned. It's not gonna feel it's gonna come out of nowhere. And yeah, I just feel like it's too late to give Kikimiki a real humanizing moment at this point.
This swamp of
she's the swamp of the outhouse, exactly. Oh my gosh. Also, hello, Shia. Thanks so much for being here. Also, Shadow, I didn't say hello to you as well. Thanks so much for being here. Hello. Welcome. Let's see.
I hope that Dana Terrace puts Kikimiki in like every single original series.
Yeah, right. Like she's just gonna show up.
Like they do that in Dark Souls. Like Elden Ring doesn't take place in the same universe as Dark Souls, but there's a character called Patches who shows up in it. He's like, wait, I don't understand. How are you here?
Yeah.
And they never really address it. I want them to do that with Kiki.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
I don't care what it is, just put Kikimiki in it. I don't care how much we hate it. You've just got to respect it.
You've got to commit to the bit now.
You've got to commit to the swamp.
If they commit, I will respect it. If they commit, I will respect it.
You can learn to love Kikimiki.
I agree, Magical, though, that Kiki definitely deserves to be beat up by all the students. That I can get behind.
I think she deserves to not be beaten up by the students so that it will cause her to have a crisis of conscience.
Oh my gosh.
That will be far more devastating than,
oh my
gosh. You know, like Katara about to kill the man.
Right, yeah, but then she lets him go, right? Of course. Like, to live his pathetic life, yeah.
You're like pathetic. Killing you would be a kindness. You pathetic man.
Oh my god, I'm gonna cry. That's so funny. All right, let's get back to the special. So this scene, you know, again, like if we're gonna include Basha, I really like this Basha stuff, right? Like, um, uh, we can go back to the question of whether Basha as a character in the show is necessary or not. But if she's gonna be here, if she's gonna be humanized in this way, I really liked this moment that we got here with her and Amity, right? And you know, I know a lot of people are interpreting this as like, you know, Basha has a crush on Amity. She's like always had this big fat lesbian crush on Amity, right? Which I think is like a fun interpretation. I think that that can definitely be a part of it. But I think the reality of it too, right, is that Basha is this like scared, traumatized girl who lost her friends and doesn't know how to cope with that and just like wants some sort of like normalcy to come back to her life, right? And like for her, when she and Amity were like the two queens of the school, like they like everything was good for Basha, right? Like everything seemed good for her, right? And she got what she wanted and she seemed like to influence people, right? And so like she really wants to like get back to that sense of like safety and stability and um you know, like her response to trauma essentially is like running away and like hiding from it, right? Like she's not able to confront it. And so like her desperate need to kind of like escape into something that's familiar, into like the past, into what she was comfortable with, right? It like really just goes to show how kind of broken she is and how traumatized she is, which is part of also why I didn't like how quickly she turned around at the end of the episode, because like the fact that she's so desperate to like go back to this sense of normalcy, like here this desperation to me like seems very palpable. And so yeah, I really liked it. I liked how this played out. But yeah, at the end it just didn't feel like the turnaround was necessarily earned, you know.
Do we place Bartholomew in that same bank of like this character did not need this much focus in this episode?
Maybe, but I also
Because I
liked
like
the
this
Bartholomew
is
stuff in this episode.
yeah, I liked it. I liked it. Don't get me wrong. Um, think about it this way, right? Imagine you're like you got to get to the airport, right? You got a
Yeah.
flight to catch. It's the only flight going in that direction that day. You got a flight to catch, and you're on a very tight schedule. And you're eating breakfast, and you gotta have the breakfast. It needs to nourish you. You know you're not gonna be able to have lunch,
Yeah.
because you're gonna be busy traveling. So you're like, oh, I need a good full breakfast, but I can't take too long to make it. So I'm gonna have some Weetabix and some fruit that I can toss over it, and it's gonna fill me up.
Yeah.
Would I prefer a delicious fry up? Of course, but it's gonna take too long to make.
Right.
Bartholomew is the little sausages of the fry up that we don't have time to make. Right? I like sausages. Just like there's a time and a place. Like
Sure, sure.
if we were like if it were the day before we were traveling and we had a full third season, I mean a full extra day,
I
um
like this metaphor a lot.
I'd be all about that fry up. I'd be like, yeah, I don't have to get up to travel until 4 a.m. So I'm going to enjoy this fry up for my brunch, and it's going to be great. I'm going to eat these Bartholomew sausages. This metaphor's getting out of hand, but like
I love
that's
it.
the thing. It's not like I don't like these things. Of course I do. They're funny. The Hexside stuff is funny and cute, and it's just that like the more we look at this, the more present it becomes to me that
Yeah.
Ida like two scenes, and like I feel like there's stuff emotionally that has not been resolved with Ida. There's stuff that I personally
Yeah.
think is
Yeah.
more. What do I know? I'm not the one writing the story. Like the third special might come around, and we may look back on this and go, actually, no, they handled it
True, true.
perfectly.
Absolutely. We might
Um,
change our minds on this entirely once we see the
but
third special.
as it stands, it's like we just need that simple, nourishing breakfast that's going to take us 5 minutes to throw together, you know. And it needs to cover the important nutrients of what we need for this story to work.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I just wanted more Ida.
Yeah, that's totally valid. That's totally valid. Yeah, yeah. I like I said, I like the Bartholomew stuff. I like the Basha stuff, but yeah, I totally agree with you that we needed more Ida for sure. Absolutely. Um, one little detail that I want to point out though, like just a little detail that is there as a part of Amity's character that we've seen since season 1. Like whenever she gets nervous, she like grabs her dress or like her skirt and she like I don't know. Have you ever noticed this that Amity just like bunches her fists like in her clothes whenever she gets anxious or whatever,
I
like she
did,
doesn't know what
yeah.
to do. I just love that. I love that little detail so much.
Sometimes she does it when she turns into a tomato.
Yeah, it's very cute. I love Amity. Amity's definitely just one of my favorite characters. I love her a lot.
Do you love her more than Kiki Miki though?
I do love
I
her
know
more
that
than Kiki Miki.
I know the
Yeah.
competition is pretty strong there, but I know how much you love Kiki Miki.
Yeah, yeah. I love this little bit too, right? Like just the callback, right, to the switcheroo that Gus did is really fun. It also, just goes to show how far Bartholomew has come, like as an illusionist, right? And it's so cool. Like you can actually kind of see, you notice the switcheroo this time, right? Like if you're paying attention, Amity tries to get away. Basha tries to hug her, and then they do the Bartholomew creates this little diversion, right? His little like rock face with the tongue sticking out, which is cute. But then as the puff of smoke comes out, that's when they switch, right? That's when they switch bodies, because then we see them running away and we see Bartholomew use the abomination magic and catch the rock, which is of course
Yeah.
it's Amity this time, right? So I love the little the hint that we got right before we even got revealed that it was switched, which is kind of the same that they did in the Luce and Hunter switch too, right? When Hunter as Luce used his like dash magic, and then we were able to kind of connect, like, oh wait, that's when the switch happened. So I like that. That was really clever.
It's just like the princess switch.
Right, exactly.
It's exactly the same. That's what happens in the princess switch.
Oh my god.
I don't
And
mean to I don't mean to harp on I'm responding to what Toon said in the chat. I don't mean to
sure.
harp too much on the Ida thing because like there are other examples in media where certain characters who took more forefrontal running in earlier seasons have slowly become less relevant to the show. And like Amethyst is a great example. Like you get to a certain point in Steven Universe where Amethyst just isn't that important anymore. And like
Right.
while I can personally mourn that, I guess, for lack of a better term, because Amethyst is my favorite character, probably in anything ever.
Yeah.
Amethyst's story was over. Like Amethyst's arc was completed, and I didn't feel like the lack of Amethyst only bothered me insofar as I just really like seeing Amethyst on screen.
Yeah.
Um, but I wasn't like dissatisfied per se because Amethyst's arc came to a close by the ending of the series proper. You know, Ida, I don't necessarily feel the same. Where like they put so much emphasis on Ida in season 1 as like a crucial part of the fundamental dynamic of the show emotionally. And then all of a sudden she just stopped being relevant after a certain point,
Yeah.
and we didn't really see too much of her until
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 these
now.
two scenes, right? Yeah. Yeah, no. And we talked about this a little bit last time too, right? About how like we don't even remember the last time Luz and Ida, like I don't even remember how they left off emotionally. Like when was the last time, like what was the last
It
conversation they had together? Because like, Ida
would
had
have
that
been,
moment, right, where she was like, oh, Luz is gone, and I like couldn't remember.
I believe the last time they actually spoke was when she gave her back her or the last time we saw them speak properly was when she gave her Ida's longest toenails box, and it had the Palestrin word
Oh
in it.
yeah.
Um, which was a long time ago
That
that
was
we
so
saw them
long ago.
interact.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
it's
it was the and this is where we begin to get into the issue with Rain. It was the last time I felt like I was emotionally invested in Ida as a character, because I hate to say it, but I just don't care about Rain. Like I really want to. I think Rain
yeah,
has a cool design. Rain is cool on paper, but Rain is kind of like Rain just hasn't had enough time in the
yeah,
oven
yeah,
to feel like a decent supplement, you know, because it used to be Luce and Ida,
Yeah.
and King was like the emulsifier, the one who kind of, you know, King and Hootie were like the emulsifying fluid for the relationship, which fundamentally focused upon Ida and Luce. And you had extraneous relationships outside of that, which I thought were really cool.
Yeah.
And this is one of the main reasons why the sidelining of certain characters actually doesn't bother me that much, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, for me, it was always Luce and Ida, and Willow, Amity, Gus, you know, the mileage of how bothered people are by how sidelined they were will vary from person to person. It never really bothered me that much, because at the end of the day, they were supplementary,
Right.
right? Compared to Ida and Luce, who to me were the heart of the show. And then Luce kind of goes off to Amity, and that's all very compelling, and I like that. But then Rain, the relationship between Ida and Luce ended up being supplemented by the relationship between Ida and Rain, and the relationship between Ida and Rain just isn't even close to being as interesting. But then
Yeah.
again, that might be me, because I just don't care that much about romance. I will always find the mother-daughter relationship more interesting conceptually. But what do I
Yeah.
know?
No, and I will say that as a person who does like romance, like I am a fan of romance and stories. I like writing romance. I like seeing romance. Obviously not all the time, and I don't it's not my favorite. But I like romance, right? Like, and I like it when it's done well. And as someone who does like romance, I can say that the heart of the show for me has always been Luz and Ida, especially in the first season. It got a little bit lost in the second season.
Got
Um
completely lost in the second season, with the exception of like a couple of core
right, with
scenes.
the exception of like a few moments, right? But like I do agree that I wish that that could have remained a focus of the show despite all the other stuff that I really like, right? I love the friendships, I love the romance, I love the conflict, right, with Bellos and everything. Love it. Think it's great. But for me, I do agree with you that the heart of the show was always the Luce, Ida, and like King as well, right? King relationship, and that sort of familial bond that they created, right? Like the weirdos got to stick together. We're all outcasts in our own way. We're all loners in our own way, but we're coming together, right? Like that was always really compelling to me, and I agree that that got a little bit lost as the show went on, which is a shame. Um, yeah, I guess, all this to reiterate the fact that it's just such a bummer that the show got cut short and that we
Yeah.
didn't get to see more of these dynamics get fleshed out. And I saw online as well. I didn't see where this came from, so maybe someone in the chat could tell me where this came from, because I apologize that I just don't remember. But I also saw that the crew apparently answered somewhere online that there was a scrapped dynamic between V and Hunter, and that would have been so cool to see, right? Like, because Hunter is like that character that we saw have these kind of parallel arcs with like all these characters, right? Like with Luce and with Amity and with Willow and with Gus, and we got to see how Hunter's arc kind of developed as he like related to these different characters, and that was like really well done in my opinion. That's one of my favorite things about how they wrote Hunter's character, and one of my favorite things about the show, to be honest. Like I think that that's one of my absolute favorite parts of the show is the way they wrote Hunter's character. And it would have been so cool to see that with V as well, right? Like V being a character who has been so traumatized by Bellows and has gone through her own struggles and like her own escaping, right, the coven and everything. And so like it would have been really nice to see that dynamic too, and see how that could have gotten written. And so yeah, there's just so many things, right, that got cut and got taken out that is just like such a bummer. And hopefully we get some sort of spin-off or comics or something
Yeah.
again in the future that we get to see some of these stories come to life.
I am gonna use Avatar: The Last Airbender as a positive example, which I
Yeah.
very rarely do.
Yeah.
Um, I think much in the same way as Ida and Luce are the heart of of the Owl House, or at least they were. Um, you could say a similar thing about the relationship between Zuko and Iroh.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting to note that you know, it wasn't a time constraint, but obviously the Atla crew ran into their own issue in terms of taking the story forward, because one of the major cast members died, you know. in the middle of the production. So all of a
Right.
sudden, the the iconic voice of Uncle Iroh, this like irreplaceable presence, died
Yeah.
in the middle of producing it. And so they had to quickly alter direction in terms of how they were going to include that character in the show. And even though he was a huge important tentpole of that show, but I never found like the death of Mako made a huge difference to not necessarily Ira's presence in the show, but the way they handled it.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't feel sidelined per se. Like the fact he doesn't talk a lot in season 3 is something they handle as well as they can,
Right.
to deal with the loss of the voice actor. But you know, just anything. I just feel like we're starved for the character
Yeah.
of Ida. I feel like anything that isn't just Ida's whole identity is giving a shit about Rain now.
Right.
Like, I just don't care about Rain.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just sad.
I am. I do agree with you. And like I just wish Rain, like I like Rain on paper, right? Like I like the idea of their character. I don't mind. I even like the idea of a romantic interest for Ida, right? I know that like when that idea was first coming up, you and I had a little bit of a disagreement on that, and like that's fine. I think it's fine to dislike that as well, right? Like it's whatever. But
I don't dislike it. I disliked it more to begin with.
sure, yeah. And there's a lot I do like about it, but it just feels like we could have had just more chemistry between them. I just feel like there's not that much good chemistry between them.
Yeah,
And it does feel like we're being told about their relationship a lot more than we're being shown, right? Like we
yeah.
get these lines from Ida, right, where she says like, "Oh, I just wanted to see Rain. Oh, I like care about Rain. Oh, I'm worried about Rain," right? But like none of that
Agreed.
really translates to like how does that manifest, right? Like we're being told a lot of these things but not really shown a lot of these
You
things.
know, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Um, and in terms of like the constriction on time, I find myself referring more to movies than TV shows because obviously that's the biggest difference. Collectively, these three specials will have more screen time than the average movie.
Yeah.
Um, and I think when Rain was first introduced, I drew a parallel to Gina and Marco from the movie Porco Rosso
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like the lost love, the one that got away, the one that didn't quite work out. And I that kind of gave me some hope for how they could have done it, and they kind of went in the opposite direction, and that's fine. I don't
Mm.
expect, Porco Rosso is not a story about a healthy person with a
Right. Yeah.
healthy outlook on the world, and that's the tragedy of that film. But there's a lot you can learn in terms of how those characters are coordinated on screen together. Like the
Right.
second Gina and Marco speak, there is this immediate sense that these two characters have a long history and they know each other. Like from the second she sits down to talk to him, and all it takes is him pouring her out a glass of wine, and it speaks volumes to the nature of their relationship and
Right.
this like unspoken, aged, tired sadness that they share. And those two characters have only two on-screen scenes together. They speak more than that,
Right.
but they only have two on-screen scenes together unless you also count the flashback scene
Right.
when they're flying. It's his debut flight. And they only have two on-screen scenes together. And even then, they have more chemistry than Ida and Rain, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. And I totally acknowledge that this is going to be opinion based, right? Like there might be some people who watch Owl House and think that Ida and Rain have great chemistry. And like if you see that, that's great.
That's
I'm
great.
happy
That's
for
totally
you.
fine.
But May says in the chat here, it's like there's some chemistry between Rain and Ida, and it's like sure, I think like you could definitely argue that, but like in my eyes, I feel like Rain has so much chemistry with Darius.
With Darius, yeah, like they
Like they have this
Ida,
one tiny scene together, but they just like have such a great
you
dynamic.
just feel it, yeah. I feel like the relationship between Ida and Rain is sold mostly through like platitudes and
Yeah.
shorthand that don't quite fit. Like the easy
Yeah.
example being her calling them Rainstorm, right?
Yeah.
And like using nicknames like that, and it's
And
like that's
there are parallels, right,
perfectly.
to Lumity, like especially in season 2, like we get the parallels, and it's sort of implied like through that way too. And yeah, I just feel like we could have just gotten more.
But it's like when you've got when you got Porco Rosso, right? Porco Rosso is such a. I mean, the way they write that relationship in Porco Rosso is genius. It's such a brilliant film.
Yeah.
But their introductory scene, she walks in and she starts like talking to him about this other character, the Curtis character, and she says, you know, he asked to marry me, and I said I've already been married to three pilots. One of them died in the war, one of them died in wherever, and one of them died over the Pacific. And Marco just like stops eating when she says that, and and like before he even opens his mouth, you realize that she's giving him news, right? That
Right.
he did not know this, right? And then he follows it up with, so they found him, and he pours her a glass of wine, and it's like immediately you get this sense of history between these two characters, like a shared
Right.
history about people we don't see, that is also completely extraneous to them being romantically involved, like completely extraneous to them being
Totally,
romantically involved.
totally.
I would have loved to have seen, I think the best we got out of Ida and Rain was them as kids, but the tragedy of that, the issue with that, is that it's not sufficient because kids and adults, like we're talking about like a 40-year difference
Yep.
between then and now,
Yep.
they are not the same characters at all. They're
Yep.
not even close to being the same characters. It's nice to see them as kids, and that's the closest I've ever been to giving a shit about them. But like they're not the same people in the
Yeah.
same way that Marco and Gina are not the same people as they were when they shared that debut flight. Like that's almost the, I mean, it is the entire point of that story, the jadedness and the sadness that comes with the passage of time. And but it's like you don't, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
I get it. It's different. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
Porco Rosso, I don't know what the timing was for making that movie. I don't know how much time. I know it was it was originally commissioned as a short, which then expanded into a feature film.
Yeah.
Um, I just don't know. I'm just giving examples of like ingredients I think are necessary to make us care about a relationship outside of the sense of them being romantically involved. Look
Yeah, yeah. I
at
mean, like even if we want to stay within the realm of Owl House, right? Like if we want to just talk about the differences between Lumity and Ida and Rain, right? Like Lumity has so much stuff going for them that is outside of just their relationship, right? Like a lot of season 1 and season 2 was about Amity's like struggles with her insecurities, right? And like her kind of breaking away from her expectations of her family, and like how Luce was a catalyst, right, in order to like give her that confidence to do that. And then like now in season 2 and season 3, right, we're getting Luce's character arc of her feeling like it's her fault that like you know bad things are happening, and her like you know extraneously blaming herself for things, and how now Amity has to be there as her support to kind of like get her through that, right? And so like there's so much more to their relationship as well than just they like each other and they like find each other cute, right, or whatever. And I think that works really well for their relationship, and the fact that they're kids, and they're going through this, sort of adds to that, right? But then you know when we see the stuff with Ida and Rain, it's like yes, we got that stuff when they were kids, right? Like Ida not really having friends, and then only you know finding someone that she has stuff in common with Rain, and then Rain being like new to the school and like making friends with Ida. And then of course we find out later on, right, there was a whole conflict with their relationship with the curse and like all of that stuff. But like yeah, it just doesn't feel like enough for me to care about that relationship. I just wish that we had more, because I do like Rain, and I like the function that Rain has both within Ida's character arc and in the story. But it just feels like they were tacked on, and I just wish that it was more and better integrated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I completely agree. I think there's a lot that can be achieved through implication, and there's a lot that, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
look at
I mean, I feel
this
like
is
we've gotten a lot with even Basha and Amity, right? Like
yeah,
Basha's like desperation to go back to normal is
this
like this aspect to her like motivation that like adds some depth to it, right? And yeah, it's just a
this is
shame that we didn't get that with Rain.
this is going to be a really obscure reference to make given our current audience, but I'm thinking about it because they talked about this in one of the latest Drawfee episodes.
Uh-huh.
Fargo, 1996. The main character in Fargo 1996 is married to a man called Norm, and they have like the loveliest
I
little
love Norm.
relationship. And he's just like, he's so quietly supportive of her. Like, she gets a phone call at 4 a.m. because there's been a double homicide. And Norm's like, you gotta eat
Let
your
me make you
eggs,
some breakfast.
Margie.
Yeah.
Breakfast, gonna make you some eggs, Margie. And like, he gets up and he makes her some eggs. He doesn't complain. He wants to do it because he loves her.
Yeah.
She's his wife. He loves her, you know. And she loves him, and she's like supportive of his like painting, and it's
Yeah. It's really sweet. Yeah.
and it's like you don't need too much. Like I would have loved to have seen just a scene of them when they were together and things were okay, because we don't see
Yeah.
that. We get a
Yeah.
scene of them when they were
Yeah.
together when things weren't okay. I would have
Yep.
liked to have seen a scene of them together, just like doing nothing of substance at all.
Right. Right. Totally. Totally.
Like, oh, but you know, what do I know? Like
Yeah.
every show has at least I can't think of that many shows that don't have at least one episode that I'm truly not fussed about.
Sure.
That I look
Sure.
at, I'm like, I skip this every time. Even Cowboy Bebop
Yeah.
has Boogie Woogie Feng Shui, which I just skip.
Of course. Of course.
Actually, Fargo doesn't have an episode I skip. Fargo's the exception.
Fargo's the exception. I think, yeah, no, definitely, and especially with the show like Owl House that had to get like so reworked at the last minute. Like, of course, there are going to be flaws. So, yeah, and again, just to reiterate what we said last time, right? Like, all of our criticisms of the show are not us hating or not us like disparaging the crew at all. Like, we absolutely love the show. We respect all the hard work that went into it, and of course all the hard work of the crew and writers and everyone behind the scenes that made this magic happen. We are not the kind of people that are going to sit around and complain and, you know, demand unrealistic things. Like, that's just not what we like to do with our criticism, right? Like, we try to approach this thing out of love, out of like care for the show, right? And so yeah, just wanted to reiterate that before we went off again. But we've been spending a lot of time talking about Rain and Ida. Before I guess we just move on, was there anything else that we wanted to say on that? Because we kind of talked about that a lot.
I'm sorry, I had a lot to say.
No, I had a lot to say as well, so it's totally fine.
It's funny to think we came into this thinking we're not going to have much to say today.
Right. But I did say at the beginning that we were going to be a little all over the place today, and that definitely held up to be true. So, I did want to go back in the chat a little bit earlier where Robin asked if Rain is the cake and bread and Bartholomew and Steve are the little sausages in this metaphor. What are the other Owl House characters? Because I thought that was fun. I would
Luce
say
and Ida are absolutely the bacon and eggs.
yeah, they're like the eggs. They're like the meat, protein, energy that you need to get through the day. King is like the fruit that you eat on the side.
Toast. King
is the toast. Yeah.
Upon which you place the eggs and bacon.
Yes, they're the toast. And then like Amity, Willow, and Gus, and King, right, are like the fruit. They'll give you the vitamins you need to get through the day.
In America, you do the wonderful thing of having your savory and your sweet in the same kind of.
That's true.
Which is
yeah.
Genius. It's the wonderful, beautiful contribution America makes to the
breakfast.
palate of breakfast. It's almost entirely unique to America, and I love it.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of sweet and savory in breakfast.
It's great.
So, yeah. So yeah, that would be your healthy, balanced Owl House breakfast. Yeah, definitely. Wish that we could have gotten more time for sure. Although I will say, you know, because we got cut for time, we did get the collector. So at least we got that, which is a nice thing.
I've started referring to certain characters as my children.
The collector is just your child.
It started with Azuken.
Right.
And then it expanded outwards to Molly McGee and Libby. And now I need to adopt the collector into my family.
Yes, you've just got a wild soiree of misfit children.
Can you imagine the collector and Asukasa interacting?
Oh my gosh, the charge between the two active brain cells going on. Asukasa would like come up with something in her head, and then the collector would like manifest it,
And they'd go fucking hog wild
and they'd
over
go
it.
wild. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I paused on this frame and I kept this frame open for the longest time because I wanted to talk about it a little bit. Just again to kind of showcase how much Amity has grown as a character and how far she's come, right? Like I feel like this is an intentional parallel to that moment when she was on, I think it was on the stage when her mom was like showcasing the different Abomatrons or whatever. And I think that it was that moment where she was sitting on the shoulder of one of them in a very similar way. I don't know if this is an intentional callback to that moment or not, but it felt like it was a parallel. And also just to kind of point out, I saw someone pointing this out on Twitter, so I wanted to point it out on stream here as well, that this abomination guy that Amity is sitting on right now
His name is
is,
Trevor.
whose name is Trevor, of course, is like approximately the same size as the boosted up like mega abomination that she made in season 1 with like the power glyph that she was cheating with or whatever.
So right. I
So
didn't even notice.
yeah, I just thought that was cool, right? That like in season 1, Amity's like cheating powered up abomination is like the same size as like her abomination now that she's just like casually pulling up with ease. So yeah, just shout out to Amity and how far she's come.
I am so glad you pointed that out. I would never have even thought about that.
Yeah. And we get that here too with Amity too, right? I can't be who you want me to be, but we can still save your teammates, right? Like it really just goes to show how far Amity has come. She is not the kind of person who's going to pretend to be someone that she's not anymore, right? And we love that for her.
We do. Our sweet child.
Our sweet child, our sweet babby. Yeah, so many characters in the Owl House and other shows are definitely our children. I agree with that, May. All right, so next scene, we are back with our boys, Gus and Hunter. I saw someone in the chat say earlier too that they wish we could have gotten more Gus in this episode. I agree that I felt like Gus was a little sidelined in this episode as well, but like Tom said, like I'm a little bit more okay with Gus getting sidelined than Ida, but it's still a shame how much Gus did get sidelined as well too. We talked last time, right, about how the whole moment with him confessing that he knew Hunter was a Grimwalker was really just like glazed over, and we could have gotten more with that, which is a little bit of a shame, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not even entirely sure what else they could have done there, really.
Yeah. So they wake up and they're like in this underground place. They're like, what the heck happened? The sleeping nettles or whatever, they got kidnapped by Kikimora. But then the wall caved in or something, and so like they're ready to go, right? And Hunter's feeling bad because everyone's feeling bad, and he's still sad about Flapjack, and everyone's an emotional mess, and we all cry.
Like this if you cry every time.
Like this if you cry every time. And then we see the plants like all coming up and the vines and stuff, right? Which we got little hints of earlier in the special, which is to, of course, be a visual representation of Willow's emotional distress, right? We've seen her as a character and a couple other characters here and there do this effect with their eyes glowing. And like we talked a little bit, I don't think in this special, but like in previous specials, we talked a little bit about the eyes glowing and how we never really necessarily got an explanation for what that meant. Like, what does it mean when a character's eyes glow? But because we've
Your
seen
eyes
it,
don't do that?
my eyes do that when I'm under some really heavy stress, right? Like if I've got a deadline coming up at work, all of a sudden my eyes will just start glowing,
Yeah, my eyes glow when I'm stressed, when I'm hungry, when I'm turning into the avatar state,
Yeah.
when I've got a really bad itch that I just can't reach.
Oh my god, yeah, when you've got that itch
Um,
and your eyes just start to glow, yeah, it's such a pain.
we've all been there.
We've all been there, yeah. But we never really got a clear explanation within the show itself about like what this means, and no character has ever pointed it out really to another character, like, "Whoa, your eyes are glowing! What the heck?" Other than that one episode where like one of Gus's eyes was glowing, right, and it was like, "Whoa, one of your eyes is glowing." It's weird, right? But we've seen time and time again that like whenever characters are like under this stress or under like extreme emotional anguish of some kind, or if they're really angry, right, when they have these really intense high emotions is when we see their eyes glow. And that's also when we see that their powers, their magic powers, kind of correspond to that energy, right? Like whenever they're really angry, like their powers like increase tenfold, right? So I really like that. That's something that we never really ever got spelled out for us, but because we've seen it time and time and again, we're able to kind of put these pieces together, right? So like in this scene when Willow's eyes are just glowing, right? Like she's not able to control her magic. It's like completely out of her control because it's just so powerful and like all encompassing, and I just really like that. That's really cool. And I like that I also really love that we got these moments for Willow, right? Like Willow, in my opinion, especially in season 2, has just been one of those characters that did get sidelined a little bit. I really love Willow. And I feel like again, like she does kind of demonstrate for a lot of characters, right? For Luz, for Amity, for Hunter, right? She's sort of that parallel for a lot of different characters to kind of showcase the growth for everyone. And now in this moment too, we get to see her own growth as well. So yeah, I really loved this moment. I really love that we got this Willow development in this special. And I really love Willow as a character. I think that she's really great. And I've been thinking a lot. So okay, I have a secret to tell you guys. I've been thinking a lot about a new video that I am planning to write soon. It's gonna be an
Booty
Owl
is
House
praised.
video. It's gonna be an Owl House video, and I do want to have a little section on Willow and just kind of talking about how she's this character that kind of so I kind of want to talk in this video, like please keep this a secret because I wanted this to be a surprise. But I want to talk a little bit about how characters kind of embody this like non-binary space essentially, right? Like how characters just don't necessarily fit into boxes in one way or another in various ways, right? Like with Luce, especially like being a human and a witch, right? Like she doesn't necessarily fit into a box there. And so I did want to talk about that a little bit with different characters and how it kind of that concept applies to them. And with Willow, I think like she's really interesting as this character who has like a lot of sweetness, a lot of kindness, a lot of heart, but at the same time, like she's really tough, right? Like she's really strong and she's really powerful. And how she's like this character that exists within this like nebulous space in between that, this dichotomy between that. And I really love Willow. I think she's an amazing character, and I wish that we could have gotten more of her, but I like that we got this much of her in this special at least.
Well, I'm interested to see that video.
Yeah, it's gonna be really good. I'm really excited for it. um So yeah, she got into a run-in with Basha, and she's like trying to control her emotions, but they're all out of control, and she's like swallowing up Gus and Hunter, right, with her plant
We've
magic.
all been there.
We've all been there. Robin has a "if looks could kill" glare, and their eyes glow when that happens. Yeah, I can relate to that.
I've been told that I look like a murderer when my face is just like in its default state,
Yeah.
that's a flattering thing to hear.
Yeah. All right. So back to Rain and the Collector. So the Collector is like, I'm not in danger, right? Like I am totally good, right? You're
I'm in
trying
danger.
to I'm in danger. Um and Bellows is like, someone close to you is planning your betrayal. And the Collector's like, nah, you don't mean King, right? I would have known if he was gonna betray me, right? Um and where is he now, right? And then we kind of just like look to Francois. And I really love the kind of like subtlety that we're getting with like what's going on with the collector, right? So we know that the collector is someone who's very lonely, right? We know that they've been on their own for maybe thousands of years, right? Trapped in the in-between world. We know that they are a character that genuinely just wants to make friends and just wants like people to play with, and they just don't necessarily understand like that their consequences have actions, or sorry, that their actions
That
have
their
consequences.
consequences have
Their
actions?
consequences have actions. You know what I mean? That their actions have consequences, and they don't, and he doesn't necessarily understand, right? Like empathy, right? He doesn't understand that people feel things when he does stuff. So this is all stuff that is going within the character himself, right? But he is just a child. He is lonely, and we know that he has this relationship with the Titans, and because of that he wants this friendship with King. But we also know that he has like this resentment towards Luce because King considers Luce to be his best friend and not the collector to be his best friend, right? So in the collector's mind, like Luce is kind of that character who stands in between him and King, right? Essentially. And
I can't wait for them to become besties.
Right, exactly. I can't wait for Camila to like scold the collector. So because the collector has that resentment towards Luce, has that kind of fear towards losing King to Luce, and also the collector has this kind of previous trauma of like betrayal, right? Because of Bellos, you know, ironically enough, Bellos is the reason for this trauma and is now the reason for this like paranoia to come up again, right? So again, Bellos is the worst, but because of that previous trauma, you know, the collector has this uneasiness, this inability to fully trust, right? And I love just this moment that kind of illustrates this doubt that the collector has within himself is just him looking at Francois, right? Because we already know what Francois kind of represents to the collector, right? Francois is this plushie that King will only let Luce hold, but not the collector, right? So he kind of represents that schism that's there between King and Luce and the collector, right? So you know, when Bellos asks, you know, where is he now, and we're kind of seeing this moment of self-doubt from the collector as he just looks to Francois, and I just love the kind of metaphor of that, of like how this plushie represents this doubt within the collector. I just thought that was really well done.
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that either.
Yeah. Yeah, the collector is definitely very much of a child, right? And has this fear based on their experiences, right?
Of being lonely and being a scrinkle.
A little lonely scrinkly. Okay, so here we go. Here comes my, other than Kiki Miki, my biggest complaint of the episode. And I feel like this is a very common complaint that I've seen people have for this episode. I've seen people complain about this a lot. So
it commits one of the great cardinal sins of screenwriting.
Exactly. So, you know, again, this just really feels like this is a product of having the time cut short. You know, we just had to throw in like one little convenience for the plot, and it's so irksome that this is the trope that they decided to rely on, because it's so overused. It's so obnoxious to see. And it's disappointing to me in particular, because the Owl House has always just been better than this. And so it just feels kind of unfortunate, disappointing to rely on this like really old tired trope for a show that has otherwise been like really sharp and really like on top of it, right? And we even like kind of get a little bit of a fake out moment too, right? Where like, you know, the collector over here. So the trope that I'm referring to, right, before I get too much into it, just so everyone is on the same page, the trope I'm referring to, right, is of course the trope that the character conveniently overhears another conversation, but only the part of it, right, to misconstrue what's actually going on, right? And that
didn't hear anything you just said for the last like 30 seconds.
Oh,
So, but
oh,
I feel like I can probably fill in the blanks
yeah. I'm
because I
basically explaining what the trope is that we have such a
it's
problem with, right?
the thing is
Just
that it's frustrating because they really didn't need. I mean, they really. I just feel like they didn't need to do it at all.
yeah,
Like
they really didn't. Yeah, I don't
they could
know.
have just. I feel like it could have just been a matter of the collector seeing that King is with Lilith and Ida
Yeah, I feel like that could have been enough.
well, like we don't need the collector to hear any specific line of dialogue and like literally happen to be listening at a very specific part of the conversation.
Yeah,
You know,
and to even have this moment, right, where the collector's like, no, hear that, he's looking out for me, and for him to go back and like listen more, only for then to still like not get the right part of the conversation is just really frustrating.
yeah,
It's just really frustrating and annoying. We just really didn't need this, right? Like we saw, like if we had gotten the moment, right? If we had gotten the moment where Luce actually reunites with King and Ida, like, and the collector
that would have
saw
been
that would have been
perfect.
enough, right? That would have been perfect.
And they could have done that if they weren't showing us Boscha and Bartholomew, and they were letting us see Ida and Camilla meet for the first fucking time.
Exactly. Like, oh, this could have been. So I don't know. Maybe this script just needed like one more passover or one more draft to kind of get there. Like I don't really know what the production process was like, whether they were kind of rushed in rewriting this one and was just like, you know what, let's just throw in this trope because we can't think of anything, right? Like if that was the case, then I would understand. But yeah, it's a shame, right? Because we were like so close to getting these things that could have worked really well. And again, I don't want to be too presumptuous. Maybe there's a moment planned for the third special that is going to be like really special and really important for Camila and Ida to meet and this reunion to happen, right? But yeah, it's just a shame that both of those things had to be true, right? Like we didn't get that reunion in this episode, and we get this really annoying plot convenience trope being reused tiredly again. And it's just a shame, right? It's just kind of a shame that these pieces just didn't fall together a little better.
Yeah, I mean, that trope really is it's secondary only to it was all a dream
Right. Yeah,
in terms of not
exactly.
quite knowing how to resolve.
And they do this trope two times in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's one of my biggest complaints about that show as well. But at very least, what I can say for that show is that the second time that it's done, it's supposed to be a deliberate callback to the first time it's done. Like it's supposed to be a parallel to that moment. So at least I can give it. You already saw the first time it happened. The first
Like,
time it happened was in
yeah.
season 3.
Sorry?
When it happened in Buffy, you were there. You are already aware of the first time it happens.
Could you remind me what it is? I don't remember.
It's the moment in season 3 where like Buffy comes back after running away for the summer, and she overhears her mom and Pat talking about how like, oh, sometimes it's harder that she's even back, you know, and then she like wants to run away again.
She walks in and I'm saying, I'm going to kill my daughter.
Exactly.
And then she leaves and she says, with kindness.
Exactly. Literally exactly that. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
If they'd done it that way, at least it would have been funny.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly, May. This moment seemed like King was going into a trap or hurt the collector, and you King cared too much to do something like that. But sadly, it's just a misunderstanding. Yeah, it's just one of those misunderstanding tropes, which is just annoying. Um, does the Owl House do scripts or is it a storyboard base? That's actually a good question.
I, as far as I know, it's script
I would assume
based.
it's script based
I
off of
think,
how the show is.
yeah, it's normally safe to assume a show is script based rather than storyboard based. From what I can tell, storyboard based is less common. Um,
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in storyboard based animation writing for TV. I think in my opinion, it's a much stronger way of.
I mean, I think it depends on the show for me. Like,
It depends on the show. Because obviously something like Gravity Falls is so like you know witty and dialogue heavy and punchline heavy, where a script is really beneficial. But for a show, if it's any show that wants to integrate story and visuals in a more active way, storyboard is the way to go.
Yeah. I agree that for most animated shows, I think like storyboard makes a lot of sense. But I think that there are exceptions, right? Like I feel like Infinity Train is a show that just makes more sense to be script based, which it is. Owl House, I feel like it kind of rides that line where like it works as a script based show because it's so kind of story heavy. I mean, I don't know. Like Steven Universe was a board-based show, so maybe I think it really depends. I think Owl House could have benefited from being a little bit more board-based.
It's not about whether or not something's story driven or not. It's about what the priorities of that story are. So
Right. That's why I scratched what I said there and kind of changed.
in the
what I
case
meant.
of something like, I mean, the reason I gave Gravity Falls as an example is that Gravity Falls literally has so much of its humor is
a visual humor.
Punchline. It is punchline based rather than visual. You know, a lot of the it's a lot of fast paced dialogue between Stan and Dipper, and you know, with something like Steven Universe, on the other hand, they care very, very much about how meticulously they communicate certain plot details through the visuals and through the atmosphere. Like it's not when you look at how the episode Lion 3 was written, it's so important that they had actual storyboard artists and they had the thinkers saying no, the video needs to be from Rose's perspective, filming Greg rather than the other way around, which fundamentally has an effect on how we perceive Rose and her interest in Greg and her interest in humanity and this that and the other. Like the visuals and the visual communication are so important to the way that story is told.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's just a matter of like what is more kind of important to drive the story. I think that's more what I was trying to say, like whether it is the visuals or whether it is the dialogue. Because I think like a show like Infinity Train, for example, like it makes sense to be a script driven show for that one, because it is mostly kind of dialogue driven, right? And I think Owl House is like a show that kind of toes that line a little bit, right? Like it's dialogue driven, but also like is very heavy in the visuals. So maybe it could have benefited from being a little bit more board driven than script driven. But the way that it plays right now makes me feel like it's a script driven show.
Yeah, that's where my mind is at.
But yeah, totally agree that what Toon says, that every time I think about this special, this scene definitely is what irks me the most out of everything, right? Like, of course, the collector pulls away and is like, no, you're fibbing. And of course, King had to say it in the most like ominous way, right? Like, I know a more permanent solution or whatever, right? And the collector being like, that didn't sound very friendly. It's like, yeah, it didn't sound very friendly. Why did he say it like that?
It's just like it. Not how it doesn't feel like how King would talk.
Right, exactly. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah.
It's I mean, I don't know, maybe it is.
Yeah, and with this immediately afterwards, right? Like with King just being like, I don't know, this whole time I was scared of making him mad, but now he's just a lonely kid and I can relate to him, right? Like it's like, oh, collector, if you had just listened for like 10 more seconds, again, just that trope is so frustrating.
Oh, rest in spaghetti.
Yeah, I guess that's a valid concern too, and whether this kind of miscommunication is going to affect the pacing of the third special. Like, yeah, it's just like, is it going to needlessly drag on the conflict, right? Like, that's definitely a valid concern. And I have faith in the writers that it's going to work itself out in the third special, but I can't lie that it did irk me for sure.
I have faith in no one.
I wish I had faith from Buffy.
I only have faith in Jesus.
Sure. Okay. Of course.
My best friend, Jesus.
Seuss from Gravity Falls.
Yeah. Hey, dudes.
That was a good Seuss impression. Anyway, we're getting off track. So we get this moment between King and Ida, right, where King is like, I relate to him, I want to help him, right, and Ida's like, oh, I'm so proud of you for how much you've grown, right? It's a very sweet moment. It's just would have been nice if Luz was there too.
That would have been great. It adds to that feeling of separation between Luce and Ida, the fact that
Yeah.
so much of their storytelling is so separate.
Yeah, absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
God, absolutely. Um, I just miss Ida.
I know. I miss Ida. I miss Ida and Luz. I want Ida and Camila to make out.
Same.
Just make it happen, please. Okay, so I think maybe let's do this last scene and then we can probably wrap it up at that point because this next
Yeah.
scene is probably my favorite scene in the special.
It's the one where it turns out the real owl was the house we made along the way.
Good one. All right. So Kiki Miki is freaking out. Freaking out all over the place, blasting her beams left and right.
That sounds like a euphemism.
and meanwhile, Camila and Luce, use an invisibility glyph to get away. Yeah, this scene is definitely my favorite scene. So Luce is frustrated, right? My plan fell apart. I messed up again, and she's being that self-blaming, self-martyr, really hard on herself. And I love that Camila just legitimately straight up takes the advice of Willow and Gus, right? Like what Willow and Gus told her earlier, what do I do? And Willow and Gus were like, well, what I do is I talk about my own failures and I talk about how I got through them, right? And this is exactly what Camila does here, which I absolutely love. Luce is so hard on herself. She feels like she's always messing up. She feels like she can't do anything right. And Camila is just like, you keep messing up. That's just a part of life, right? And we get her mistakes now too. And I absolutely love this first one that we got, okay, well, once I scheduled my wisdom tooth surgery a day before my wedding. And I was like, wow, Camila, that is bad. That's really bad. And that is definitely a mistake, right?
I do.
I do. Yeah, I love that. I need fan art of that now. I need Camila saying her wedding vows with her like puffed up swollen cheeks.
Oh God.
Oh, that's so sweet though.
Rest in
And
spaghetti.
rest in spaghetti, yeah. Kiki. So anyway, I started blasting. Oh my god, Shadow.
If they
Jeez.
just replaced Kikimora with Danny DeVito and just didn't they didn't even no one acknowledged it,
I'd be fine with that. I'd be good with that.
we'd all be